Imagine if at the height of the Cold War, our government took money from our patriotic Americans and invested it in the communist Soviet Union. Or if in 1967 we took money from our soldiers and put it in North Vietnam. Or what if we took money during World War II and invested it in Hitler's Germany? It sounds absurd, doesn't it? And yet here we are 2 decades into a new century, and we're actually thinking about taking money from our servicemen and women, from our veterans, and from patriotic government employees and investing it in communist China in the middle of an economic war. Join me in the economic war room as we talk about this unbelievable situation and what we ought to be doing about it. So we welcome Lieutenant Colonel Allen West, former congressman, into the economic war room, and we're going to talk about some of the political issues and some of the personal issues, how this impacts our troops and our soldiers and our government employees. The idea of investing American funds in Chinese communist companies that might be even, in fact, building weapon systems to be aimed and used against us just seems ludicrous. Welcome, Colonel West.
It's good to be back with you, Kevin.
Now, you're up to speed on this whole idea of the thrift savings plan, right?
Yeah. Well, as a matter of fact, I remember when the thrift savings plan got started back when we were deploying overseas, and it was a great opportunity to take some of the money that you were earning, combat duty pay, hazardous duty pay, things of that nature, and you could kind of, invest it in this thrift savings plan. And it was a great thing for a lot of the young soldiers because all of a sudden they could come back and they had a nice little lump sum of funds that they could use for wherever they wish. Some of them go out and put a down payment on a nice car, or some people would save it for college or other things.
Yeah, no, it's a great plan, and it's professionally managed. They have advisors that come in
Absolutely.
and they tell them, you ought to own this, and it's done pretty well for people, and people have invested in it or are pleased with it. But there's this new thing. Right now, in the thrift savings plan, as you know, it's invested in the United States, and you can invest in foreign countries also through the MSCI EFA index. That's Morgan Stanley Capital International. And the EFA is Europe, Australia, Far East. It basically is the developed markets of the world.
Sure.
But there's a new push. We need to move it to the MSCI All Country World Index. Now, do you know all the ins and outs?
Well, the thing is that when you start talking about all country index, when you start talking about this globalism, the thing that I think that we have failed to understand is that China learned a lesson from the collapse of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union did not collapse militarily. The Soviet Union collapsed economically.
That's right.
And what the Chinese understood is that, somehow we've got to maintain our philosophy of governance, being this socialist communist model. But yet, how can we inject ourselves into this globalist market? How can we use capitalism to bolster us and keep us in the position that we're in and become like a tick to all of these Western economic nations and make it so hard for them to be removed because all of a sudden, next thing you know, you can get Lyme disease.
So how they do that is they suck out intellectual property.
Yes.
They've hacked the American system. They demand that corporations
technology transfers.
You've got to give us your technology if you want to enter our markets. But now there's a whole new and more insidious thing, is they're actually seeking to get American capital. They've gotten stocks on our stock exchange.
Sure.
And they've asked for a lot of investments in things that we don't really know what they're doing.
Well, I think we do know what they're doing. Because if you look in the last 3 to 5 years, China, who once did not have a strong maritime capability and capacity, they now have their first domestic-built aircraft carrier. They're working on their second one. They're sea testing that first aircraft carrier. And they're, when you read the One Belt, One Road strategy, they tell you exactly what they want to do. Their economic boon, if you want to call it that, is not for the betterment of the quality of life of the Chinese citizen. I mean, you can see the people in Hong Kong as a testimony of that. It's about expanding their, not regional, but global hegemonic dominance. And the fact that we are looking at extending investments to help China to grow and build their military and their totalitarian regime is unconscionable that we would be doing that. I mean, I might as well give you my concealed carry weapon and make sure you have plenty of bullets and say, shoot me in the head.
Yeah, no, it's not a good thing for the Americans. It's not a good thing for the world.
No.
But here's how they're doing it. It's really hidden and it's really insidious. What they did is they contacted the people that make up the index, and they said, you don't have enough China exposure. And so the MSCI said, you're right, we're going to quadruple the amount of money that our index invests in China. Okay. Then they got the Thrift Savings Plan Pension Board to agree to the idea of, well, we're going to invest in this index. Oh yeah, it includes China, but that's okay. Well, what they've just done is they've handed billions of dollars. Once this goes into effect, and I know there's Senator Rubio and Senator Shaheen and Congressman Meadows, they're all fighting against this.
It should be a bipartisan thing.
It should be a bipartisan thing, but once it goes into effect, without you knowing it, without you doing one thing, your money in the Thrift Savings Plan could be pulled out and invested in Chinese companies.
And that begs the question, with all of the discussions and the deliberations and the meetings, negotiations with China on this trade deal, where is Secretary of the Treasury Steve Mnuchin? Where are those chairmen, vice chairmen of this or whatever? They should be tracking the things that China is doing economically in the United States of America, especially investments. When you think about the absurdity of how so many people are coming together with the boycott, divestment, and sanctions program against Israel, why are we looking at the exact same things? Why are we not looking at, what type of Chinese funds are on our stock exchange? Because I think that's a great way to block them and keep them from having investment in the United States of America and keep them from having economic growth. Maybe that should be a priority instead of some of these, tariffs that we have out there that could affect the American citizenry. Let's start blocking off their investment.
Well, we're going to talk to Roger Robinson, who's an expert on that. And we're also going to talk with Kyle Bass, who is a very successful hedge fund manager. We're going to get perspective on whether or not it makes economic or national security sense to invest or have thrift savings plan investments placed in China.
We should not be using, soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, government employees, Coast Guardsmen. They should not see their funds being used to funnel China's economic growth and capital investment here in the United States of America.
Well, we're going to explore this issue. We're going to talk with leading experts, and then we're going to talk with some veterans just like you that have experience and have had money in the thrift savings plan, and how they feel about the idea of our money funding our adversary. Well, let's turn first to our friend Roger Robinson. Roger is a man who architected the economic war that we waged against the Soviet Union and won the Cold War with. He brought down the wall using economic means, as you mentioned. He was at the National Security Council after his time at Chase Manhattan Bank. So let's welcome Roger Robinson. Roger, you're a hero of mine. You are, in my estimation, the Leonardo da Vinci of economic warfare. Some of my friends in Washington tell me if it weren't for the work that you and your team did during the Reagan administration, that Berlin Wall might still be standing. So we are so honored to have you come join us.
Well, thank you very much, Kevin.
Tell us a little about, for our viewers, what you did during the Reagan administration that made a big difference.
Well, as you know, I came out of Chase Manhattan Bank, where I was a vice president, division executive, ironically in charge of the Soviet Union and Central Eastern Europe, Yugoslavia for some 5 years, knew where the money was, knew what kind of creditworthiness they had and, more importantly, didn't have. And so I came to the Reagan administration with a good understanding of just how paltry their hard currency income and cash flow really was. The fact that they were spending more than they were making by about $16 billion a year, that their total hard currency income was only about $32 billion, roughly 1/3 of the earnings of GM or Exxon at the time, at least in terms of their total revenues. So it was a very sparse event. The Western banks and governments were funding 100% of that gap, that funding gap of, say, $16 billion annually that the Soviets otherwise couldn't meet. And so I came in with the notion that we need a new strategy here, which is to go after the Soviet hard currency cash flow. There's a lot that happens in rubles, as you know. Most of their trade takes place there. But if we just concentrated on the hard currency dimension, that this was where the dividends would be paid. And of course, 2/3 of that income was comprised of oil and gas deliveries. So they were really focusing on natural gas as their savior for the 21st century and arguably beyond. So I had was the first to really go after the Siberian gas pipeline project. This meant that they can't use our technology and equipment to continue to supply the Siberian gas pipeline. They objected. They tried to sell that equipment anyway, and we closed the entire American marketplace to those offending companies, making clear you can do business with the Soviet Union or the United States, but you're not going to do business with both. And I think that this was a decisive moment because Europe understood finally, after 4 of those 6 companies that were in violation of our sanctions, all went under within about a 6-month period, spilling 150,000 people into the streets of Europe unemployed. They started to get the idea of where their export destiny would lie, and it wasn't with the Soviet Union. There were many factors that led to the collapse of the Soviet Union, but I think none more potent than the economic and particularly the financial piece. So that's a little bit of the story that I had in very short form during the Reagan administration, and the role that I played, that the president kindly termed the architect of the economic and financial strategy for the takedown of the Soviet Union.
Well, that's fantastic. Basically, bottom line is by cutting off access to Western markets and Western money, we were able to break communism in the Soviet Union. Fabulous. But now you're sounding a new alarm, and the new alarm is twofold. The Chinese communists are accessing Western markets and Western money, and that's a problem. And then the second aspect of it is, with that money, they're doing some pretty bad things. Can you tell us a little about that?
Well, the numbers are much more disturbing. As you know, China is an economic juggernaut, the likes of which the Soviets never knew, thank goodness. The situation we have here is, in the new era, it's really about stocks and bonds, namely our capital markets, that are the keys to the kingdom.
And not only that, they're actually forcing some investment through our MSCI All Country World Index, aren't they?
Yes. Look, you have as much as $1.9 trillion in our stock market. You have another trillion or so that we're exposed as Americans in their bond market, buying Chinese government bonds, particularly those of their state-owned enterprises. And so we're already talking about circa $3 trillion of financing that we're providing to the Communist Party and the Chinese totalitarian government. So this is a huge problem, and they're doing it in many different ways, including having our index providers like MSCI, like FTSE Russell, like Dow Jones, S&P, Bloomberg, Barclays, others, who are buying hundreds of Chinese companies right out of mainland exchanges, circumventing SEC regulations and disclosure requirements and the like, and are stuffing them into indexes which have trillions of dollars of funds under management that are automatically forced, in effect, to buy those stocks as soon as they appear in these indexes. And that is a huge problem because it means that every time a Chinese company, including bad actors like the People's Liberation Army or human rights abusers, and we can go over some of who those bad actors are, but believe me, they're there. And as soon as they appear in an index, scores of millions of Americans automatically have them, in effect, inserted into their investment portfolios and their retirement accounts.
Well, now, wait a minute, Roger. I've been told, everybody's been told over and over that the Chinese are funding us. But what you're telling me is that we've been funding them.
That's correct. I mean, they have $1.1 trillion of our T-bills. By the way, if they ever sold them all, it would be not the calamity that people have predicted. It would be 50 or 100 basis points for us in interest rate rise. They don't have leverage, just to put that myth to bed. But they are funding us to the tune of about $1.1 trillion. In turn, they're taking out of our markets, both stocks and bonds, multiples of that amount. And they plan to put trillions of dollars more into our market in terms of the exposure of American investors in the next 2 to 3 years. So much so, Kevin, that the American people could well wake up one morning, that 150, 180 million Americans who are in our capital markets, and find out to their chagrin and even horror that they're holding 15, 17, 22, 25% of their entire investment portfolios are in Chinese securities. That's the day that we have a true crisis. That's the day we're in checkmate, and that's the day that we have to avoid, and we have to do it now.
Thank you so much for your past service and bringing all of this important information to our attention today.
Thank you, Kevin.
Now, we just heard from Roger Robinson, one of the world's leading experts on economic warfare. He says funding the Chinese is a national security risk. What do you think?
Well, absolutely so. And if you think about this, where there are 3 pillars to the security of a nation. It's economic security, energy security, and national security, and they're all interrelated. When you think about the energy security, how even going back to World War II, how Hitler was streaming across Europe to get to those Ploesti oil fields in Romania and the oil fields in Russia. We look at now what Putin is doing with natural gas and how he's holding Ukraine and the rest of Europe hostage. So the exact same thing with your economic security. And it comes back to this grand scheme that China has had, that they learned from the Soviet Union, that they will not allow themselves to collapse economically. They will use that as a means by which they can sustain their communist regime, and they have gone in, we allowed them into the World Trade Organization and all these things, and now look at what is happening. I mean, you got the HSBC banks, and you have all of these investments. I mean, look at what they're buying up in New York and all the properties and things that you have all across the United States of America. And now they're looking at being a line item of a capital investment using the funds that we're paying our soldiers, and we're not counseling them to not want to do, or we're not even informing them. But again, I think it comes back to, we in the United States of America, Kevin, what frustrates me is so often we think in election cycles.
Right.
And you can't win against people like the Chinese or the Russians or even the Iranians when you think in election cycles. You have to think long ball. You have to think long-term strategy.
We need a patriotism that supersedes just
You
the
need
election.
a patriotism that supersedes that, and just the same with our corporate business leaders. Think about it during World War II, if you had corporate business leaders who want to do business with Japan or Germany.
No question about it. But there's a group in the United States that says, ignore the national security, let's just make money. It's a free marketplace.
Well, it's the same thing with Google. I mean, Google, who is refusing to work with our military with artificial intelligence, but yet they want to work.
So what we say in the economic war room all the time, what we see as a marketplace our enemies view as a battle space, this is a battle space.
It's an incredible battle space.
But let's put that aside for a second and let's ask another question. Even if it weren't a national security risk, would these investments make sense from an economic perspective? And to get that answer to that question, we're going to turn to our friend Kyle Bass of Heyman Capital. Kyle is one of the world's leading hedge funds experts. He understands markets. He made a lot of money in the 2008 collapse because he saw the phony accounting and all the things that were behind the subprime crisis, and he said, look, this isn't real and true. This is a housing bubble. And he made prudent investments and made a lot of money for his investors. Let's ask him exactly what he thinks about investing in Chinese companies. Kyle, you're an investor who's made his career on both finding great opportunities, but also finding where there are serious problems. You made a lot of money when you recognized the serious problems with our subprime mortgages and the housing bubble and all of that. If we stop the thrift savings plan from investing in the MSCI All Country World Index, are we going to be hurting the patriotic servicemen and women and the veterans and all the employees? Are we going to be hurting them because we're keeping them from getting in these great new Chinese companies? Isn't that where all the growth is?
Well, there's two arguments there about the questions that Congress bring up about whether we're hurting them or not come from two different angles. One is the potential lost returns going forward, which is what you're alluding to in this question. The other is, well, we're already invested there. Isn't it going to hurt our servicemen that are already invested in China, or retirees that are invested there, if we have to force them to divest? Will that make things go down and cause economic harm? That's like saying, once you figure out there's a Ponzi scheme, should we just keep funding
going,
it,
right. Yeah.
or should we stop throwing good money after bad? So clearly that's a bad argument. But I hear that argument a lot in the halls of Congress, so I think that one's a little bit of a strange one. Your question, and again, I'll broaden your question a little bit, because
okay.
For me it's important to say we're not just going to stop the thrift savings plan from investing in the MSCI All World because of China. What we should be saying is, now China's the worst offender. However, we should be saying that we should not commit the thrift savings plan or that money of any retiree in the U.S. into a company that doesn't submit itself to audits, that isn't Dodd-Frank compliant, that doesn't adhere to the same standards as U.S. securities do, U.S. companies do, to raise money here.
So this is almost an Enron question as much as anything else.
Big, yeah, it's as big, because right, if you've got companies that are in China or Russia, which, as you know, are adversaries of ours, or pick another country, pick Brazil or pick Argentina, that might have a company that wants to raise money in the U.S. that doesn't submit itself to an audit or isn't Dodd-Frank compliant, why should we allow them to raise money?
Explain that. It does. The company doesn't submit itself to an audit. What does that mean? When we're investing in Chinese companies, they're not the same as investing in U.S.?
That's correct. So Chinese companies, the Chinese government has basically stipulated that audits of their companies are national security concerns, and therefore they should be exempt. And so when you look at all of the companies, the 160 plus companies listed here that are particularly Chinese ADRs, none of those companies submit themselves to a true covered audit as deemed to be an audit by the Public Accounting Oversight Board in the U.S., the PCAOB.
So we don't know when they report earnings that those are actually what they're reporting. They're certainly not on our standards, and they're certainly not measured in the same way that we measure our companies.
Our auditors have never been let in, meaning the big four, the auditors that we know and trust in the U.S. But when you bring up Enron, you think about Enron, WorldCom, you think about some of the biggest frauds in the U.S., and they actually submitted themselves to U.S. audit standards. Imagine how bad the numbers really are of companies that refuse to submit themselves to audits. And that's where all of that money's going. And again, China's the worst offender, but there are many other offenders on that list. It's just less market cap, less focus. But I'm of the opinion that we shouldn't allow any companies in the United States, or foreign companies, raise money in the United States that don't adhere to U.S. law. I know that sounds like a crazy idea, but as we sit today, that is exactly how they're raising money.
Wow. And so with this new change, if the thrift savings plan is allowed to move forward and put money without even knowing it, our patriotic servicemen and women, patriotic employees, retirees, veterans are going to have money. If they put it in the international fund, they're going to find that that money is going to go into companies that may not be adhering to our standards, and in some cases, there may be even outright frauds there.
Oh, I mean, look, there are many outright frauds that exist today. One being Alibaba. When you look at their numbers, it's if you take the time to read what they do publish, you walk away almost in tears, realizing how they say they make their numbers. There are plenty of huge frauds in the international space, the majority of them being in China, and the money's going to go there. And by the way, you don't even know what you own. Most of the Chinese companies that you invest in are variable interest entities, VIEs, that are based in the Cayman Islands. So if and when things go wrong, you're a U.S. citizen that owns shares in a Cayman Islands tracking entity that doesn't own anything in China.
So you don't have any vote. Like when you're shareholders, you don't like where they're going, you can't vote?
You don't even have a claim to an asset.
Oh, wow.
So China has found the loophole. They have found a way to funnel the U.S. dollars they desperately need to grow their Belt and Road program, to grow all their surveillance systems, because they have to buy things they don't have there, and no one will take their money, so they need ours. This is the way that they're getting our money.
So these companies are really doing things like surveilling people or concentration camps and things like that?
I mean, it's even worse than that. I mean, if you read the ChinaTribunal.com that the UK just put together, the QC that ran Slobodan Milosevic's war crimes tribunal just ran a tribunal in the UK that determined that not only are the Chinese incarcerating between 1 and 3 million people in Xinjiang and other places due to their political or religious preference, they are harvesting organs from them while they're alive. They're an organ buffet line. And this isn't some right-wing or left-wing conspiracy. This is a UK bona fide tribunal run by Sir Geoffrey Nice, who is one of the foremost war crimes experts in the world. People aren't reading these things. Go read it. Go to ChinaTribunal.com and read the summary.
Wow.
You will be sick to your stomach.
Well, you were shouting warnings in 2007 and 2008, hey, this is a bad deal, we need to fix this, and largely ignored. And the net result is we suffered one of the greatest economic catastrophes of our lifetime. Let's hope that people hear this warning and we stop this problem, because it could be even worse.
Well, I hear you, but it's likely we've lost a couple $100 billion already. I just hope we don't lose more.
No, thank you, Kyle.
Thank you.
Well, Kyle made some strong points. It sounds like investing in China could be really risky.
Well, of course it's really risky, because their economic model is a socialist economic model. Why would you want to invest in a country that believes in centralized control of economic means of production? Your return on investment is really going to suck.
Well, you know, in the long run, I think you're probably right, and Kyle certainly backs it up from an expert's opinion. But, you know, maybe, all right, we've shown that this is a national security risk, and we don't want to fund weapons pointed at us, and we see that it's really kind of a bad investment idea, but maybe people should at least have the choice to make. If they really want to invest, maybe to improve relations with China or something, why don't we talk to some veterans and get their perspective? Maybe they really are hankering to invest in China.
Well, that's a good question of economic patriotism.
So, well, let's ask them. Brent, you had the opportunity to hear about some of the national security issues, some of the investment issues, and you've got an investment background yourself. How does all this make you feel about the thrift savings plan?
Kevin, I'm appalled, and I had no idea the depth and the breadth of the issue until I had a chance to visit with you and to watch your guest today. The thing that concerns me the most isn't necessarily me as a veteran. My time of service is past. Now I'm just a citizen like you and everybody else. My concern is that how about our young men and women that are out there serving today? By virtue of this, we're transferring currency and making an investment in a country that's arguably a hostile threat to those men and women that are out there in harm's way right now. So I'm appalled that we are functionally handing them the currency and the sword with which to bludgeon our men and women.
Yeah. Well, you've served our country also. Tell us a little about your service.
Kevin, I was commissioned out of the Navy ROTC program at the University of Missouri, and then had the pleasure to fly for the United States Navy from '89 to '98. Started out as an A4 instructor, and then my first deployment was with Carrier Air Wing 15. We were embarked in USS Kitty Hawk, where we deployed to the Korean Peninsula. From then I went to Carrier Air Wing 11. We were embarked on USS Lincoln, served in Southwest Asia, returned back cross deck back over to Kitty Hawk, did a Pacific Rim deployment.
You've been all over this, man.
All the way from the Korean Peninsula and then to Southwest Asia. And then I was blessed with a really unique opportunity in the pilot exchange program and flew the F-16 with 20th Fighter Wing as a part of 9th Air Force, where we again deployed to Southwest Asia.
Yeah. So you have fought the good fight, you've defended our nation, you've been on the front lines in a sense, but now you're worried your capital may be aimed as a weapon against us.
Absolutely. I mean, China is a huge industrial nation. They have ambitions far beyond what we probably ever imagined. I think that originally when we began to embrace China, endorse them entering into the WTO, we thought, hey, if we can get capitalism and freedom to shine the light behind this curtain, that hopefully that freedom would expand there. What we've seen is a far different experience. Just look at they're now projecting power into the Spratly Islands in the South China Sea, completely ignoring international maritime law. That's presented a unique challenge to the 7th Fleet and the United States Navy to enforce freedom of navigation there. We haven't seen the results that we'd hoped for. We thought that there would be an open open society, and we've received something much worse.
Yeah, well, it upsets you, I can tell, from a national security standpoint, but you're also a markets guy. You understand the market. Do you think these are good investments?
No, absolutely not. And we discussed this even back in 2014. Alibaba was just nothing more than it was really a currency transfer into China. And the other thing too is we still have the deepest, most liquid, most opportunity of any markets in the world right here. I understand the goal for diversification. We certainly want to make wise investments for our servicemen and women and our retirees, but there is more than enough opportunity right here at home in the United States of America through various markets that I don't think we have to go risk capitalizing a threat.
So what's your message to the board that oversees the thrift savings plan? What would you tell them?
Invest right here at home. There's no more dynamic market in the world than the United States of America.
Karen, you served our country for a long time, and you retired as a lieutenant colonel, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
How does it make you feel, as someone who served their country, to hear that we may be spending a lot of our money and our servicemen's and women's money in Chinese investments?
I think that's terrible. I mean, it's shocking to me.
Well, you're not somebody that was just stationed here in the United States, though. You've been deployed around the world, haven't you?
I have. During Vietnam, I spent a year at the Nakhon Phanom Royal Thai Air Force Base there in Thailand, and then I've spent 10 years in Germany.
Wow. And what did you do while you were in Germany?
I was a reservist there, and I was working at Rhein-Main Air Force Base, and my position was in admin and personnel there.
Yeah, so you've had the chance to see multiple cultures in your deployments, and you've had the opportunity to meet lots of people. And there are a lot of good things going on in the world, but you don't feel comfortable with sending money to China?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. When I've been reading and doing a lot of research lately, I just am amazed that our government would do such a thing, that they would take the funds from our active duty people or retirees and put it in a country that we don't have any control over.
Well, they're likely an adversary of the United States at a minimum.
Yes, they are.
But when you were active duty, did you have time to stop and do all the research that you've done recently to know, well, this makes sense or this doesn't make sense, or you just go about your daily life?
But no,
and it would just be taken out of your paycheck and
Right.
thrown over there, and you wouldn't even know it. Well, you know, you put 27 years of service for this country, and I really appreciate it. Thank you, Karen, for your service.
Thank you.
Alan, welcome back to the Economic War Room.
Well, I'm delighted to be with you.
You know, we talk a lot about different things, and you and I have had some great conversations. So you were one of the first people that I turned to when I heard about what was happening with the thrift savings plan. I mean, you're uniquely qualified because you had a chartered financial analyst designation and you were active in the investment world. You served our country as a West Point grad. You left 2 legs in Vietnam in service of your country, and you've been active in the political realm as well. How does all this make you feel when you hear what they're doing?
Well, I didn't know what was happening until you introduced me to it, Kevin, and I appreciate it very much. I am invested in the thrift savings plan, and there are 3 issues relative to whether or not some of the money from active duty military, retired employees of the United States government, and people like me that are kind of both, that have our money in the fund, that this 5-person presidential appointed board is supposed to have prudent investments that satisfy the needs of us and so forth. So we're talking about 3 things. Number 1, patriotic, right. National security, right. And the economic and financial aspects, obviously investing some of our money in China.
Do you think it's prudent? Does
no,
it seem
of course.
Prudent?
Well, no, because what I have understood and heard on the program and learning from you and so forth, Kevin, is the fact that these Chinese companies that we're they think are very glamorous, and they think they're wonderful to get in. We can make a lot of money. Let's think about the currency fluctuations with the Chinese yuan,
Right.
and let's think about the lack of transparency. Now, when we were CFAs and we studied those companies, they had to have the Financial Accounting Standards Board to do an investigation and do a look-see at these companies and check what they're doing. We don't know. We don't have anything like this with the Chinese companies. So, what kind of an investment could be wise in a company where they don't have accounting standards like American companies? We have some mistakes in our own companies. We have fraud and we have corruption, even when we have good accounting firms taking care of them. But if we can't have that at all in Chinese companies, much less Chinese companies have their elitists involved and invested in their companies, the People's Liberation Army people, all those elitists in the company, they're behind most of these things. It's a communistic nation. This is the 70th year since they took over in 1949. And remember what a bloodbath that was. They have so many peasants in their country. They don't profit from what happens. And some Americans who want us to get into these funds and push it and lobby for it, they think, well, we'll make a lot of money. I'm not sure we'll make a lot of money with the kinds of investments that they have over there and the lack of transparency.
You make a good point. This is a communist nation that's at least an adversary of the United States, and we're sending money. Now, you're also a student of history. Can you think of examples in history where we've made this dumb mistake and invested in our adversaries?
Well, I have studied Trading with the Enemy, which is a book by Charles Hagum, and it is subtitled An Expose of the Nazi American Money Plot, 1933 to 1949.
Wow.
I think there's a comparability to this. 1933, Nazism was there, so we had certain American companies that got invested, co-invested with them, helped them out during the war surreptitiously and undercover down through Argentina and different places to hide what American companies were making money off supplying the enemy. When our troops were dying on the beaches and our troops were dying in the South Pacific, American treason people invested and had investments in Nazi companies. Now, they are an adversary right now. China's an adversary. They're not an enemy. I don't want them to be an enemy, okay? But I was in a war where the Red Chinese and the Russians supported that country. They brought stuff in through Haiphong Harbor, and they were involved in that country as advisors. So they were part of the enemy at that time. Right. Let's consider them just adversaries now, but you can't trust them.
We hope they never become an enemy, but Hitler's
deep down,
Germany did.
The same thing
They
could
were an
happen
adversary in 1930s. We actually had trade with them, but then we were at war with them. We don't want that to happen.
And it didn't stop during the war. That's the real sad part about it.
We continued to fund Nazi Germany during the war?
Well, surreptitiously. We still sold oil to them. ITT had a bunch of things that they used with them. The IBM punch cards were used to track the Jews and the people that they didn't want, that the Nazis were trying to find in Europe.
How's that different than Hikvision being listed here and in part of the MSCI World Index, and they're monitoring the Muslim population that they're suppressing and putting in concentration camps? Well, it sounds very similar to me.
Well, look at all these things that Red China's doing. What you've just mentioned, number one, the harvesting of organs, for crying out loud, with some of these people they put in prisons, and we don't know how many of these companies are actually owned by members of the People's Liberation Army, which means that we are helping to fund somebody that could be our enemy eventually. Maybe we'll have a book someday that says Trading with the New Enemy, China, instead of just adversary right now.
Yours and my both hope is that we can reach out to the good people in China. The Chinese people are really a wonderful group of people.
They have been put apart.
But they've been put in a very bad situation with a bad system that is a communist government. So we need to raise up a group of patriotic investors here in the United States so we can fund to improve our country and also to invest overseas in ways that will enhance our national security and not harm our national security.
That's for sure.
Now, you served our country. Tell us a little about your service.
Well, I didn't have much choice. Grew up in an Army family and decided at age 8 I was going to West Point to become an officer. Tunnel vision, went to West Point after 11th grade at a prep school and graduated. I had 5 years in the military. I volunteered for service in Vietnam, volunteered for service in Army Special Forces, and originally volunteered to go to West Point, become an officer. So I'm a triple volunteer. I happened to suffer. I had very bad post-traumatic stress at one time, closed psychiatric ward, but I'm a very proud soldier. People tell me, thank you for your service. I say, I'm a proud American soldier. That's what I tell them, no matter what. You know, I did what I thought was right at the time, and I don't look back on anything negative.
Well, I say thank you for your service.
I'm proud to be an American soldier.
Now, you're a veteran, and you've heard from our veterans.
Yes.
Should they be ignored?
No, our veterans should not be ignored. If there are any group of people that have laid their lives down for this great nation, been willing to make the last full measure of devotion, are veterans, and we should pay attention to their voices.
Absolutely agree with that. So we've seen there's national security risk to investing here.
Yes.
It's probably a bad investment idea to be investing there, and the people who own the money don't want it invested there. So why is the thrift savings plan still moving forward with this bad idea?
Well, without a doubt, you have people that are tone deaf in Washington, D.C., and they are, for whatever reason, separated from common sense and reality. So I think the most important thing is that we got to get those voices to be heard, and we got to make sure that we're sending that message to the Secretary of the Treasury, to the Secretary of Defense, to the Secretary of State, to the President himself, and to our congressional representatives in the House and also in the Senate.
Well, I know Senator Rubio and Senator Shaheen have talked about legislation that's going to address this serious problem. How can we encourage them? Do calls to Congress make a difference? You were a congressman.
Yes, calls to Congress do make a difference, because you get that young little 20-something that's sitting there, and they really don't like to hear all those bad messages that come to them. And there's a tracking device. At the end of every day, the person that takes those calls, you know, the office manager, they brief the chief of staff on, this is how many calls we got, these were the topics of the calls. And when they see that pattern, when they see that consistency, then you get the attention of the member of Congress or the U.S. Senator.
Well, so we can make a difference. In fact, we're going to put together a petition that people can sign that says, I want to stop the thrift savings plan from investing in our adversary, China. And we're going to circulate that around so that people can make it known. And then we'll pass that petition on. But we also want to encourage everyone watching to contact their member of Congress or their senator and say, stop this. This doesn't make sense.
And I think also contact your governor to let them know as well. Because I would think that maybe instead of investing in, you know, communist China, maybe there's some investments in your local home state or your local governance that, or local businesses that you can look in as well.
Yeah, well, we cover issues like this every week in the Economic War Room. This is a big one, but this is something that impacts not just your personal savings and investments. This also impacts our nation's security and our economic security. So we need to address these things. We cover it in the Economic War Room, and we've created a battle plan that you can download and understand all of the intricacies, see some links to the article, see a link to the editorial written by the Secretary of the Navy saying this is a bad idea, and then it will give you suggestions on how you can contact members of Congress or even your governor, as Colonel West suggested. We can together make a difference. So go to economicwarroom.com and download this episode's battle plan. This is Kevin Freeman from the Economic War Room.